In a forgotten Kentucky village swallowed by time, every mother who delivered a child between 1842 and 1859 whispered the same name, just once, and never again, Carroway. Fog drapes the skeletal branches of the Appalachian woods, thick like breath held too long. A black carriage, silent weather, creaks toward a sagging cottage lit only by candlelight. Inside, a woman screams in labor, but the scream dies mid-air the moment the Carroway sisters arrive, tall, pale, cloaked in tattered gray wool, eyes too calm, too knowing. The elder Miss Prudence speaks not a word. The younger Elsbeth watches everything. Their presence silences the wind, stops the clocks. Every child they deliver survives. Every mother does not. Locals in Briar Glen say the sisters could hear a womb cry before it knew it would, that they carried tools that smelled of iron and old teeth. They never took payment, only kept the afterbirth. After the Civil War ended, the sisters vanished, their names stricken from church records, the births they attended marked only by dashes, but every fourth generation in Briar Glen still bears a strange birthmark, an ashen ring around the heart. The town forgot, but something underground remembers, and it's stirring. There's a room inside the original Briar Glen Town Hall, nailed shut since 1903. Behind that door, a ledger. It smells of rotting vellum and long, dead lilacs. Each brittle page holds a name, a date, and a fading red X. No explanation, just the mark. These weren't death records. These were deliveries. From 1842 to 1859, the register shows 118 births under one column, attended by Carroway. No surnames. No witnesses, and in every margin, the same phrase written in different hands. Only the child remained. Locals tell stories in hushed tones, tales that even the oldest widows hesitate to repeat. They say the sisters were once nurses in Baltimore, dismissed for what the church called blasphemous experimentation. Others claim they were survivors of some unspeakable ritual that took place in the Appalachian interior, deeper than any map dares go. The register was hidden by Reverend Josiah Lem, who feared its discovery would shatter faith across the county. He believed the Carroway sisters were more than midwives. He believed they were collectors. Not of lives, of bloodlines, and if you trace the children they delivered, you'll find they were not blessed. They were altered. Generations later, the effects still linger. In the winter of 1857, the town of Briar Glen was gripped by what it called a miracle. A revival, one that began not with sermons, but with stillbirths, 7 in a row, all full term, all perfectly formed, yet none drew breath. The town grieved, mothers wept, fathers drank themselves silent. And then, on the 8th night, they returned, all 7, alive, awake, but wrong, eyes clouded over like boiled milk, skin cold to the touch, yet never pale. Their cries didn't sound like hunger, they sounded like memory. Townsfolk whispered of movements too controlled, smiles too symmetrical. One child, baby Amos Fielding, spoke his first word not at 1 year, but at 1 month. Prudence, they were Carroway, born, each mother having called on the sisters in desperation. All of them believed their wombs cursed. All had heard of the midwives who never asked questions, only came at dusk, worked by candle and left without a trace. But these revived children brought more than unease. By spring, 3 townspeople were missing. Each child was found at the center of a circle of feathers, bones, and damp prayer cards torn from Bibles. The children never cried again. That year, the church bells stopped ringing. No one dared ask why. Hidden beneath a floorboard in the crumbling Carroway cottage, found decades later by a federal surveyor, was a notebook wrapped in decaying velvet and bound with what appeared to be human hair. Inside, 74 pages of delicate cursive, penned in faded black ink, and stitched margins of red thread. The notebook belonged to Elsbeth Carroway, but it wasn't a diary. It was a manual. Each page described a ritual, a sequence of chants, herbs, surgical incisions, and timed breath holds, meant to guide the unborn soul from root to crown. Some instructions were mundane, even herbal, but others read like fragments of some ancient, pre-Christian gospel. One passage chilled even hardened archivists. If the womb resists, quiet it with opium and belladonna. If the soul escapes before the seal, it will claw at the throat of the next host. Bind it in blood thread until the cry ceases at both ends. Every fifth page bore strange circular diagrams, part anatomical, part astronomical. Some ink shimmered faintly under moonlight, but what disturbed most was the list in the back. Names, dozens, each followed by 2 words: harvested, endured. The notebook was removed, catalogued, and lost in transit to Washington, or so they say, the floorboard where it was found, still wet. In 1854, records claim Briar Glen suffered a terrible famine, crop failure, spoiled grain, cattle disease. The surrounding counties sent relief wagons, but none were accepted. Briar Glen's elders insisted they had enough, but travelers passing through described something different. No one plowing, no one harvesting, fields untouched, barns empty, and yet no children starved, no graves dug. Every home had the same faint smell, earthy, coppery, and wrong. The Carroway Sisters were seen more often during this time, walking the hills barefoot, carrying small bundles wrapped in black linen, always wet at the corners. The town doctor, Henry Tulls, began asking questions. He noticed that none of the children born after 1842 lost weight during the famine. None grew sick. Some even thrived, but the older children, the ones born before the sisters arrived, grew thinner, paler, and more silent with each passing week. One night, Dr. Tulls broke into the old Carroway garden. He found a pit 4 feet deep, dozens of bones, not animal, children's. Each skull bore a fine, uniform hole at the crown, clean like a ritual drill, no sign of struggle. The next morning, Dr. Tulls' clinic burned to the ground. He was never seen again. The famine ended, but no crops returned. Reverend Josiah Lem was the last man in Briar Glen to publicly defy the Carroway Sisters. He'd preached against them from the pulpit of St. Matthew's for years, called them instruments of womb, born heresy, daughters of the serpent. His warnings were ignored. The townsfolk had grown too grateful for their services and too afraid of what happened to those who refused them. But everything changed in 1859 when Lem's own wife, young Eleanor, became pregnant with their first child. She swore she would never call the sisters. She didn't have to. They came anyway. During the birthing, the Reverend barred the door with a cross and 3 rifles. But by morning the house was silent. No screams, no blood, no Eleanor, only a single cry rising from the cradle. Lem found the child swaddled in white silk stitched with hair. It had no eyes, just smooth skin where the sockets should be. Yet it turned to face him. It smiled. The Reverend went mad within hours. He tried to drown the infant in the font at St. Matthew's, but the water boiled. He was found wandering the cemetery, naked and singing lullabies in Latin. What happened to the child remains unrecorded, but 2 months later the church's altar cracked in half. In the spring of 1860, a secret meeting was held beneath Briar Glen's grain mill, led not by priests, but by mothers. They called it the culling. 20 women. Each had lost a child, a sister, or a piece of their sanity to the Carroway Sisters. They knew no priest would sanction their plan. The town elders would deny it happened. So they made a pact, sealed not in blood, but in salt, salt to banish, salt to sever. On the 3rd night of March, they tracked the sisters' steps into the woods, into the hollow known as Widow's Throat. They waited until the wind stopped, until even the owls fell silent. Then they struck. Miss Prudence Carroway fell first, stabbed with an iron needle through the nape of her neck. She didn't scream, she didn't bleed. She simply fell, and disintegrated into ash that smelled of candle wax and mold. Elsbeth fled, but not far. The women captured her in a circle of salt, iron nails, and candlelight. She was bound in linens soaked in stillbirth milk and scripture ink. Before the flames were lit, Elsbeth whispered, "You've only paused us. We returned through the children. They burned her, but her shadow burned last. It clung to the trees for days. 42 years after the Carroway sisters vanished, the land where their cottage once stood was sold to a coal company, the records state Carroway Hill Parcel 13. The buyers never knew its history, or pretended not to. In July 1902, a team of 6 diggers began excavation. On the second day, their shovels struck something beneath the earth. Not stone, not bone, teeth, thousands of them, perfectly preserved, yet brittle as sugar. Infant teeth, arranged in concentric spirals, buried just 3 feet down. Some were strung together with horsehair, others were carved with symbols no linguist could translate. Loops, wombs, serpents devouring themselves. When the crew foreman, Thomas Raymer, picked up a larger molar the size of a baby's fist, it cracked in his hand. From the break seeped a dark fluid, warm and smelling of spoiled milk and rose water. By nightfall, the crew reported hallucinations. Screams from the trees, visions of women with open eyes and mouths stitched shut. 2 miners collapsed after vomiting blood mixed with what looked like amniotic fluid. By the week's end, 4 were dead. The others disappeared. Their families received telegrams, blank sheets of parchment, stamped only with a single ring of ash. The mine was abandoned, and Carroway Hill was sealed again with salt, but the teeth were never recovered. In 1911, the state reopened Briar Glen's northern wing to house war orphans, children left behind by the Spanish-American conflict. The town was quiet, the buildings vacant, and the church saw opportunity in silence. They repurposed the old rectory into the Briar Glen Orphanage for the Innocents. On the 3rd Sunday of Advent, the children were asked to sing. The choir matron, Sister Agnes, expected chaos. Giggling, off-key humming, scattered attention. What she heard instead was perfection. 12 children, 1 voice, inhumanly synchronized, no rehearsal, no sheet music, just a single phrase, repeated over and over in an ancient tongue, unknown to any scholar brought in afterward. A language that didn't match Latin, Greek, or Hebrew, but whose syllables stirred nausea in the gut of every adult who heard it. Sister Agnes recorded the session with a wax cylinder. She destroyed it that night after vomiting blood and clutching at her abdomen as if something were moving inside. Later, she confessed to seeing the Carroway sisters standing behind the children during the performance, smiling, watching. Elsbeth mouthed something to her, 1 word, remember. The children never sang again. Not a single note, but one girl, 6-year-old Anna Welch, began humming the tune in her sleep, every night at 3:03 a.m., until the day she clawed her own vocal cords out with her fingernails. In 1922, Dr. Harold Bellamy, a Harvard-trained pediatric neurologist, was dispatched to Briar Glen under government contract. His task, evaluate a strange cluster of children from the orphanage and nearby farms. They all exhibited the same anomalies, abnormally slow blinking, insensitivity to pain, high resistance to sedation, a recurring dream involving a needle entering the belly from below. Dr. Bellamy arrived skeptical. He was a man of science, unshaken by superstition. But after 3 weeks of study, his skepticism crumbled. He wrote in his final journal entry, "These are not disorders, these are blueprints. Someone, somewhere, designed them." His notes included sketches of the children's internal organs, drawn not from surgery, but from dreams he claimed the children projected into his sleep. He began reporting hearing a lullaby in the walls, tasting iron in his coffee, seeing 2 tall women standing outside his window, never blinking, never moving. Then, without warning, Dr. Bellamy vanished. His room was locked from the inside. No footprints. No signs of struggle, only one item left on the bed, a needle threaded with crimson hair and a torn page from Elsbeth's notebook, written in his handwriting, "Gestation does not always end in birth." Briar Glen stopped welcoming outsiders after that. By 1931, Briar Glen had become a shadow town. Roads faded, maps excluded it, and trains no longer stopped. But reports trickled out, strange ones. It began with moonlight disturbances. Locals whispered of children leaving their beds after midnight, moving in groups of 3 or 5. wandering into the woods with shovels, spades, and blank stares, always barefoot, always silent. They weren't seen during the day. Teachers said they fell asleep in class, hands caked with earth. Parents said they never found dirt on the sheets, but the hills around Widow's throat began to chain, ridges collapsing, hollows appearing overnight like breath drawn in from below. One farmer followed his son one night, armed with a lantern and a rusted pistol. He found him at the base of the old Carroway well, digging into soft black soil with his bare hands. Around him, other children scraped and hummed in low tones. No melody, just vibration. He tried to call out, but his voice failed. Then he saw what they were unearthing, small bundles wrapped in silk swaddles, still damp, still warm. The next morning, the farmer was found dead, throat crushed. No signs of struggle. His son never returned home, but each morning the hole they dug was filled back in, perfectly level, as if covered from below. Beneath the crumbling ruins of St. Matthew's Church lies a crypt sealed for nearly 80 years, until a lightning storm in the autumn of 1935 cracked its stone roof wide open. The smell was immediate: charred parchment, scorched flesh, and something older, like wet leather and rotten milk. Investigators from the diocese descended with candles and crucifixes. What they found was a hidden room, blackened entirely by fire, though no record of a blaze was ever reported. Inside, a stone altar, upon it 7 infant-sized urns, each labeled not with names but with dates. All dates corresponded to stillbirths recorded in Briar Glen between 1847 and 1853, but the urns were warm. The ash inside shimmered faintly under candlelight, not gray but white, bone white. At the far end of the chamber, a message was scorched into the wall in Latin: Mater in utero aeternum manet. The mother in the womb remains forever. A single chair faced the altar. Welded iron on its seat, a scorched midwife's apron, stiff with blood, etched into its hem in delicate embroidery, Elsbeth. Moments after discovery, the flames reignited, though no source was present. One priest survived, half mad. He claimed the room never burned down, it rebirthed itself. No one has entered since, but on still nights, villagers swear they hear crying beneath the church, crying and humming. In the center of Briar Glen's overgrown cemetery stands an ancient ash tree, blackened, split, and impossible to cut down. Every attempt over the last 100 years failed. Axes shattered, chainsaws seized, even lightning couldn't fell it. Locals call it the midwife's tree because hanging from its lowest, deadest branch is a bell, small, rusted, black with time, but it rings always once. Never twice. Always just before a woman in town goes into labor, regardless of how far along she is. It rang in 1904 when Ruth Wallace miscarried at 3 months. It rang in 1918 when both mother and child were found still and cold in a dry birthing tub. It rang in 1927 when no one was pregnant, yet blood appeared on the floor of the old rectory. So much blood they had to burn the rugs. No one dares touch the bell. But in 1939, a boy named Elijah tried. He climbed the tree on a dare, reached for the bell's rope, and just before he touched it, the tree groaned. As if something inside shifted, the bell rang twice. Elijah was found the next morning beneath the roots. Smiling, hollow, he was holding a withered birthing shawl, embroidered with the name Prudence. Since then, the tree hasn't rung again, but the ground around it pulses slightly when the moon is full. Every 4th generation in Briar Glen is born with the same anomaly. A faint ashen ring around the heart, barely visible beneath the skin, like an ancient burn that never blisters. Doctors call it a birthmark. Historians call it a warning. The townsfolk call it the Carroway mark. No two appear exactly alike, but they always circle the chest. And every child born with the mark exhibits the same signs by age 4, a resistance to cold, dreams of drowning in black water, and an uncanny ability to hear women's voices no one else hears, whispering in pairs. In 1940, a genealogist named Louise Kramer began tracing these children. Her charts showed an unmistakable rhythm. Every 4th generation from families whose ancestors used the sisters to deliver their young. Louise mapped 13 families. 12 had children with the mark. The 13th, the Wilkinsons, no children in 4 generations. But in 1941, during an excavation of their property, a small cradle was unearthed from beneath the floor. Inside, a bundle wrapped in umbilical cord and newspaper. The paper dated 1852, yet the blood on it was fresh, still warm. Louise vanished the next week. Her office was ransacked. Only one page remained, a hand-drawn circle with the word endure, scribbled over and over. After that, the mark began appearing sooner. Some say it's no longer bound to bloodlines, it's choosing now. The war had ended, America celebrated, but in Briar Glen, 1945 was the year of the singing infants. It began at the county hospital on a thick night in November. 3 babies born within hours of each other began humming, not crying, humming. Nurses described the sound as low, harmonic, and perfectly synchronized. A 4th child, born to a woman from the outer hills, joined in mid-delivery, singing before her umbilical cord was cut. All 4 babies bore the Carroway mark. Doctors recorded the sound on reel-to-reel tape, but the audio degraded within minutes, twisting into static, then into something deeper. A rhythmic pulse that made listeners nauseous, then weep uncontrollably. The humming continued every night at 3:03 a.m. for 7 nights. Then the 5th child arrived, stillborn, markless. On that night, the other 4 babies stopped humming. Their eyes turned pitch black for exactly 1 hour. One nurse who was present later claimed it wasn't them, it was something through them. The hospital burned 3 days later, cause undetermined. The 4 children survived without injury. They were taken into state custody. Each would later vanish before age 10, files redacted, birth records sealed. But in scattered counties across Kentucky, their lullaby still echoes on baby monitors, heard only once, just before the power cuts out. And always at 3:03 a.m. In the summer of 1949, rumors spread through the counties surrounding Briar Glen. 2 women were offering late-night birthing services, no clinic, no credentials, just a knock at the door, always just before the pain began. Those who saw them said nothing at first, but when asked, months, even years later, they all described the same thing: one tall, one quiet, gray cloaks, cold hands, eyes that didn't blink. It began with a farmer's wife in Hollow Pike, whose child came 6 weeks early, but was born perfectly healthy, humming. Then a preacher's daughter in Wilkesburg, who claimed her stillborn came back to life during the burial and whispered her own name. But it was the case of Mary Lou Crenshaw that caught national attention. Her twins were born silent, pronounced dead until 3:03 a.m., when they began to sing, not cry, not gasp, but sing in tandem. By morning, Mary Lou was missing. The twins, too. The room smelled of iron and lilac. On the wall above the cradle, an embroidered cloth pinned with bone needles. 2 names stitched by hand, Prudence and Elsbeth, returned. Authorities searched. Files were opened, then quickly closed. Witnesses recanted. The hospital chaplain hanged himself days later, his eyes burned out. Since then, the midwives are not seen, but sensed, a chill before labor. A shadow behind a mirror, a whisper through the floorboards. The womb remembers. Deep within the woods beyond Briar Glen lies a sinkhole known as Widow's Throat. Locals avoid it. Children are warned to never play near it. And no one can say why, but every generation someone hears the cry. It's always the same, a baby's wail, distant and muffled, coming from beneath the earth. In 1950, after the disappearance of the Crenshaw twins, a small search party, 3 men, 2 dogs, descended into the throat with ropes and lanterns. They found a narrow tunnel, air thick and warm, walls pulsing slightly, like breath held in the soil. 40 feet down, they discovered a crib, wooden, ancient, rocking on its own, carved into the headboard, the child without end. Inside, a single bundle of silk, long, rotted and soaked with blackened blood. Underneath it, teeth, hundreds, baby teeth strung like rosaries, wound around the slats, each etched with the same mark, a ring encircling a dot. The party fled, but one of them, Dale Mercer, returned the next day alone. He was found 2 weeks later in a barn, catatonic, cradling a pitchfork like an infant. On his chest, carved by hand, the midwives wait beneath. They sealed the sinkhole with concrete, but that same winter, 3 infants in Briar Glen were born with dirt in their lungs. By 1951, St. Matthew's Church had become a relic. Its steeple collapsed, pews warped with rot, and candles long since cold. Yet one event forced its doors open one final time, a baptism. The child belonged to Margaret Albright, a mute woman with no known family, who arrived in Briar Glen pregnant and alone. No midwife assisted her birth. No doctor ever examined the child, and yet she insisted, through written notes, that the baptism take place at St. Matthew's before the child's 7th night. Reluctantly, Father Gillespie agreed. He dusted off the font, called in 2 witnesses, and lit the altar. The moment the child was brought forward, the crucifix above the pulpit cracked straight down the middle. The baby did not cry, it smiled, too wide, and hummed beneath its breath. Father Gillespie hesitated, then lowered the child into the water. The font boiled, the water hissed and spat, turning black. The witnesses screamed. One collapsed, her eyes bleeding. The other fled and was never found. The font shattered into 6 perfect pieces, and Father Gillespie, his mouth agape, began speaking in a voice not his own. "We do not drown, we are drawn, we return through womb and word." He died moments later. The church was closed that very night, boards nailed shut, salt scattered at every doorway, but every 7th night since, the font fragments rearrange themselves. No one knows who does it, or how the water remains full. In late 1953, a federal investigator named Roland Wexler arrived quietly in Kentucky under the authority of the Department of Public Health. His mission, to audit unrecorded births in 3 counties surrounding Briar Glen. What he found would never reach official archives: 42 sealed births, all with identical anomalies, no attending physician, no baptism, no paternal documentation. All infants bore the same ashen ring around the heart. Wexler compiled them into what he called the legacy files. He cross-referenced old family names, Wallace, Crenshaw, Albright, Tulls, and traced them back, always to one thing: a Carroway birth. In his private journal he wrote, "The 4th generation isn't cursed, it's ripening. They are not descendants, they are vessels. Something ancient is incubating." Among his files were photographs, dozens of infants with eyes too large, mouths too silent, and birthmarks that glowed faintly under infrared light. But before he could deliver his report, Wexler vanished. His hotel room was found empty. Only the files remained, tied with crimson string and covered in thin flakes of salt. On the final page, a hand-drawn sigil, 2 midwives cradling a fetus with no face. The files were classified under a project later marked EMW, Elsbeth, Margaret, and the Womb. No further investigation was permitted. But in the town of Briar Glen, the children born that year began to hum, and haven't stopped since. They were never just midwives, not healers, not caretakers, not even women in the way we understand it. They were architects of bloodline, designers of generations, agents of something far older than Scripture and far colder than death. Prudence and Elsbeth Carroway, they did not die in 1860. Not really. Fire doesn't end what was never born. Salt only delays. Iron only wounds. They planted themselves in the 4th generation, burrowed into marrow, hid inside lullabies and birthmarks and hymns forgotten by man but remembered by the womb. Every child they touched became a door. Every labor they attended, a ritual. Every stillbirth, a rehearsal. They did not bring life. They brought return. Now Briar Glen no longer appears on maps. Its cemetery grows without record. Its trees whisper in tongues not written, and somewhere beneath the earth, the crib of the hollow child still rocks, patient, waiting. The Carroway sisters are not coming back. They never left. They live through the silence between screams, in the hum before birth, in the flickering eye of every child born under a waning moon. And if you listen carefully, very carefully, you may hear them tonight. Behind the walls, beneath the cradle, humming,